What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Naked and Truth podcast. It is your host, Sari D, and I am so grateful to be back with you guys. I have been MIA, but I promise that I have a very good reason for it. And if you got a chance to read the title of today's podcast, it is called My Mold Toxicity Journey. So, believe it or not, I have been suffering from mold toxicity, and this episode is going to dive deep into everything mold to give you guys a good idea of what the heck's been going on, what maybe you might need to look out for, and just to really gain some good life lessons that I always come out on top with whenever I'm going through challenges. So, we haven't dropped an episode since August 2024, and we're going to dive deep into history here of what's been going on, but I do just want to say that I am using a new broadcasting system, so I am hoping that the audio is coming through clear. If you're watching on YouTube, that the visual is good, so definitely let me know how everything sounds / looks, because I really want to make sure that we are coming in clear. Now, when it comes to mold toxicity, I know a lot of people are like, oh, I know when I first heard about it, I was like, what? But mold is something that is so much more common than what people realize. And what we need to remember is that mold is one of the oldest living creatures, and it literally is a living creature on this earth. Now, our bodies are naturally designed to properly detox any type of toxin, right? That's what our livers are for, that's what our kidneys are for. But what ends up happening is that with the amount of toxin exposure that we're having, with the amount of pharmaceuticals we're taking, especially things like birth control, it can start causing liver congestion, which is then impairing your ability to be able to naturally detox. The other thing that I want you to know when it comes to mold is that everybody has a different bucket threshold. So what I want you to think of is that as your body gets exposed to mold, because mold is absolutely everywhere, there's always going to be a small amount in homes. You think of things like plants, dust that's around the house, mold can grow on that. Any type of water leak is going to create mold. But more than anything, it's natural in our day-to-day environments, whether you're inside, whether you're outside. But where it starts getting dangerous is when mold starts getting the ability to grow due to, a lot of the time, water damage, but you can find it in our foods as well. Now, with us being in westernized countries, it's a lot less likely that we are being exposed to high mold toxins in things like grains and coffee beans, solely for the fact that there are standards that a lot of companies are upheld to in regards to the government's regulations. Now, keep in mind, not everything is being tested, right? So there is still that threshold for the mold to potentially be growing in some of our food products. Now, am I concerned about that being where I got my mold from? No, not at all. But we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. So getting back into our bucket threshold, everybody's body is going to react a little bit differently to mold. Some people are more sensitive to it and they're going to have a more severe reaction. Other people are going to be able to detox it better. And what ends up happening though, when you're having constant mold exposure, is you have a quote unquote toxin level load, which is what we're going to consider the bucket. This bucket can start getting filled over time, especially if your body is having frequent exposure and or it's having a hard time actually detoxing the mold out of your body. Now, what we need to remember is that it's not so much the mold itself that harms us compared to the gases that and spores that the mold releases. So you can have all different types of mold that are growing, but they can actually release different types of mycotoxins depending on the type of mold that it is. Now, mycotoxins are what becomes dangerous to us as humans. And when we are having a hard time expelling these mycotoxins, that's when we start having some very serious reactions. Now, what I want is to read a couple of mold symptoms to you guys so that you can understand what maybe some red flags would be if you're noticing that you are getting continually sick, or you are noticing that your health is declining and that you're running into some of these symptoms. Okay, so I'm going to be reading these symptoms from a book that I have that is called Break the Mold. It is by Dr. Jill Krista. If you find her on social media, she provides a ton of value in regards to mold, MCAS, and there are a few other specialty diseases that she works with. But what I want to say is that here's a general list of the ways mycotoxins affect living beings. So they can cause inflammation in the sinuses, lungs, bladder, and digestive tract. It migrates across linings of the respiratory and digestive tract. It absorbs and stores in fat, which is what a lot of people don't realize with toxins. It interferes with vital cellular processes. So as soon as our cells, especially the mitochondria, the powerhouse of every single cell in our body, starts being affected, that is when we can really see our health declining. So again, it causes that mitochondrial damage. It can impair the synthesis of protein, RNA, and DNA. So the fact that it can actually impair our DNA is insane. Mold is so much more toxic, especially at higher thresholds, than what we realize, because so many people are exposed to mold all the time and don't really think much about it. But I promise you that if you are struggling with health issues that cannot be cured, mold might be the culprit. Because what ends up happening is that when you are struggling with mold, that's when you start seeing the ripple effect. And I'll get into that when I go over my story here. But just to give you guys some ideas, it's toxic to the liver and kidneys, aka where it's supposed to be processed and detoxed from. It can even accelerate cell death. It can cause cancer, and it can break down the lining of the intestines, crosses the brain, and weakens the blood-brain barrier. So there is a ton of different things that mold can do to your body. But you know, if you're struggling with things like constant allergies or allergies that just came out of nowhere, swollen lymph nodes, appetite changes, all of a sudden having maybe some food sensitivities, constantly dealing with like irritable bowel syndrome. So whether you're fluctuating between diarrhea and constipation, or you're just having one or the other all the time, you know, all of a sudden you have chemical sensitivity coming on. There is the ability to start developing rashes, sometimes irregular heartbeat. I just want to highlight some important ones here that are going to be really showcased in my story. Repetitively getting sick or having fungal infections, brain fog, confusion, anxiousness, depression, headaches, having a hard time with balance and walking even, okay? Starting to affect the urinary system, where you're having an overactive bladder, kidney inflammation, irritable bladder, long-lasting colds, being more susceptible to infections, chronic mono or the Epstein-Barr virus, frequent herpes breakouts. It increases susceptibility to cancer, like I mentioned there, changes in the menstrual cycle, vaginal yeast or bacterial infections, infertility in both genders, and it can even cause issues with pregnancy, and or if you are having a baby, it can also affect in regards to birth defects, okay? So there is a shit ton of different areas of your body that mold can impact. And a lot of those things that I just listed there, people want to try to attack one symptom at a time. And that's really where my big issue came in. So I just want to give you guys some back history here. Okay, doing a little test alert, so I'm sorry for that freaking out on my phone there. But with that being said, the back history. In January 2021, I started to really notice that my hormones were going sideways. Now, one thing that I did in 2020 was get back on birth control. I hadn't been on birth control for years, and I got back on birth control I used the Nuva ring for 3 months. Then I decided, okay, I'm going to go back off of it. And then a month later, I was like, you know what? I want to go back on. So within those 3 months of coming on, going off, and coming back on again, I noticed a huge shift in my hormones overall. I felt like I was starting to lose my mind. I couldn't control my anger. I was going into massive waves of depression. And I know that I've talked to you guys about this in past episodes. So I tried to talk to the doctor about it, saying that I really thought that it was the birth control. He didn't think it was the birth control, of course. So I ended up going on my own journey with a naturopath. So by the end of 2021, I went off the birth control. Not, I went off the birth control myself. I was like, you know what? I'm going to take this into my own hands. I can't do this anymore. And it was September 2022 that I did my last show, my last bodybuilding show. Even though I had noticed some improvements with coming off of the birth control, I really felt like throughout that entire year of 2022, it was a constant battle of fighting myself. Even though things were going great in regards to the way that my physique was shaping, the way that my business was building, I felt like I was just constantly struggling with my mental health. But I could tell that it wasn't something that was actually going on with my mind as much as it was a feeling that it was coming from my body, right? So by the time that my show was over, I started pushing extremely long hours with work. All of a sudden, I started to develop an issue where I would go into these extreme heart racing episodes. Now, they were so extreme that they had brought me to the hospital multiple times, even in the ambulance. And it was to the point where I couldn't really figure out any key indicator of what was setting it off. It would be anywhere from 160 to 180 beats per minute at rest. Okay? It would just come out of nowhere. The worst part was that these episodes would last for 20 minutes plus at a time. So by the time I would get to the hospital and they'd get an ECG on me, everything would be starting to slow down. So they ended up sending me for some Holter monitor testing. Everything's good with my heart. I do have some serious heart issues in my family, but luckily everything was good in regards to what was coming back for the testing. So with that, I felt like my body was constantly on edge. I felt like my mind was calm, but that my body was just constantly on edge. So I ended up going to the naturopath in 2023. We ended up doing a Dutch test, which is a urine metabolite test. I highly recommend it if you constantly are struggling with hormonal issues and you want to look a little bit deeper into them. This is going to give you the best breakdown because it not only breaks down all of your hormones, their metabolites, but it also shows their preferred pathways, which is a huge difference than what a blood test is going to give you. Number one, it's so limited on what they're really giving you for information on blood test. A lot of the time they're only testing one type of estrogen. You're only getting tested one time per day, where with the Dutch test, you're going through 3 testing periods in a day so you can see how your hormones are fluctuating throughout the day. It's going to give you an indicator into really into some of the bigger endocrine system holders, like where we're looking at epinephrine, norepinephrine, your cortisol levels. And that's what I wanted to be able to get some insight into. Now, it was without a doubt that things were out of whack. I was showing low on almost all levels, where a lot of the time we're seeing an excess estrogen in a lot of women with lower progesterone. It wasn't that my body wasn't producing enough estrogen as much as it was dumping the estrogen before it could actually get processed. So there's just so much insightful information that you can get from this. But I was following a protocol and I felt like no matter how hard I tried, no matter how hard I worked on my circadian rhythm, no matter how hard I worked on making sure that I was having good boundaries with myself, not having a ton of stress constantly hit me all the time, it felt like everything in life kept adding up. We went through some house issues. My husband lost his brother. It seemed like every single time I would make a little bit of progress, something massive would happen with stress that was completely out of my control. You know, it wasn't business related, it wasn't habit related, it was stress that was out of my control. And so I kept blaming what was happening for the big stressors that I was going through as to what kept knocking my progress hormonally. Now, during this time, I was getting sick all the time. I got the vid multiple times. I got a pityriasis rash where, like, if you're not familiar with pityriasis, it's terrible. I would almost like consider it the same as chickenpox, except potentially worse for how long it lasts. I think I had it for 8 or 9 weeks, and it covers your body in this bumpy rash. You end up typically having a bullseye rash that starts in your chest area. I ended up having it on the side of my breast, and then all of a sudden my body just got covered in this bumpy rash that was so itchy, guys. And like, it's on your legs, it's on your arms. It was the shit, okay? But I couldn't figure out how. I'm working so hard on my hormones. I'm making sure that I am balancing my circadian rhythm by trying to get good sleeps, making sure I'm being consistent with them, trying to get outside and get some natural light in my eyes, you know, not being in front of the computer as much. But yet I just kept running into this roadblock over and over again. And it starts to get to a point where you're just like, what the fuck? Like, I'm putting in so much effort to be my healthiest self, but it seems like everything just keeps declining. I'm on top of my supplements. I'm taking antioxidants. I'm feeding myself super well. And then you see things like, for example, my girlfriend gave me, she's just like, honestly, Sarah, she's like, it breaks my heart because you see some of these drug addicts out there and like they can live forever and they don't run into any real issues with their health. But then you look after yourself, you take care of yourself so well, and you're running into all of these issues. And I was like, damn, girl, that is such a good way to explain this, because it does feel debilitating that way sometimes when you feel like you're putting all of your effort into making that progress, but you're not seeing the progress that you know that you deserve. So with that being said, you know, I've always struggled with my cycles, and I just thought that this was the buildup of birth control on and off over the years, that, you know, maybe right from when I was young, because I got my period at such a young age. I was 10 years old. I was overweight. A lot of the time when females are getting their periods early, they're typically heavier set women. A lot of the time they're dealing with heavy toxin load, which is what is pushing these menstrual cycles to start earlier. So I was just thinking, you know, like, I've always struggled with my periods, cramps, and just feeling like, you know, I struggled with depression really young when I was just a kid, and suicidal tendencies and thoughts. And I was like, maybe I'm just like always struggling with my hormones, right? And so with being diagnosed with PMDD, which is called premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or premenstrual depressive disorder. And what it really is PMS symptoms heightened. And what I want you guys to learn from this too is that PMS isn't normal. Just because we are normalizing it as a society nowadays, where it's like we're making all these jokes about, oh, it's the time of the month, I need to be crazy, I need to have cravings, I need to have cramps, all of this shit. This is coming from a toxin load, without a doubt. The other part is super high stressful lives that we're living, and not allowing our nervous systems to properly flow. And I also believe oxygen deprivation as well. I think it's the combination of all of those things, and or some or the other. And that's what's really pushing this PMS to be higher than we've ever seen it before. We're running into endometriosis and PCOS at higher targets than we've ever seen before. We are running into women getting premenopausal in their mid 30s. Like, we should have never seen a decline like this in women being so young. Women being such a young age as to when they're starting to fall into menopause, okay? But I really believe that with what's causing the PMS, it's also causing the early menopause. We should never have numbers where they are in regards to women fucking struggling when it comes to their overall hormones. Okay? So, with that being said, I kept trying to follow her protocol, and I was just thinking that, it'll get better in time. But over time, I started to notice that I was losing myself more and more. So, on top of getting sick all the time, when I used to never get sick, like, guys, it was years that I would go without getting sick because I simply took care of myself. Now, all of a sudden, I'm turning into somebody who's constantly getting sick. I'm having acne flares that are unexplainable, and I have always had acne. But we're going to be able to get into that as well too, because acne really does come from the gut. For so many years, I was trying to treat it with prescriptions, with even just different diet protocols, but not the right diet protocol. Trying to use every cream and serum, and like the list just went on and on for the multiple decades that I was trying to fix my acne. I started getting it as young as grade 4, which means I would have been 8 or 9 years old when I started developing acne, which in turn goes on to prove the point of, getting my period the next year. There really is a correlation between toxin load with all of this, okay? But I was going into these acne flares in 2023 that were like all of a sudden all of my face. Like, I mean, like acne I have never seen before. It's like a different type of acne. It was just rough and so embarrassing, obviously. I would get all of these different rashes that were just starting, and I was like, what the fuck is going on? Like, this is not me. But of course, I'm still just trying to treat the hormonal issue. I'm following the adrenal insufficiency protocol for what was going on with my heart racing and just an overdriven central nervous system, right? I'm trying to deal with the acne by itself. Nothing's really working. I'm noticing that my workouts are starting to really decline. All of a sudden, I put on 15 pounds. That was just like that in just over a month. Guys, I promise you, I have not struggled with binge eating for years, like years. So the fact that 15 pounds just came on like that, it was unexplainable. And I'm like, what the fuck is even going on? Seriously, that's all I kept thinking was I was like, something is wrong, but I don't know what it is. So I'm trying to still make it to the gym. I'm trying to still show up on podcasting, on in content for my clients. And I just felt like over time, I just kept losing myself and losing myself. I ended up trying to go to the Dominican for my 30th birthday and my 5-year wedding anniversary. As you guys know off that episode, ended up in the hospital with a gastro infection there. And after that, I just never felt the same. I was praying that that trip was going to be the relaxation that I needed. But by the end of it, it was super high stress. I was sick for like another 3 weeks after getting home. I had to deal with the insurance shit that literally lasted like 6 months of them trying to not pay us out for the insurance. But I kept fighting. So if you guys ever run into an instance like that where you've paid for insurance, you try to put through the claim, they decline it, fight that shit because they ended up paying it out fully. And I'm like, man, if I would have just chosen to just leave this here and not actually fought this, they would have just been able to drop that and we would have been out thousands. Now, with that being said, 2024 comes. We're through February now. I'm starting to get better from the gastro infection, but I just kept getting sick on and off, right? Dealing with different bacterial infections. I started dealing with yeast again, which, I haven't dealt with that for over a decade, really. And so I'm like, what is going on? Like, I am trying so hard to take care of myself. I did a parasite cleanse, really hoping that that was the change that I was looking for. And I just kept feeling like each month I was losing myself a little bit more, a little bit more. And that was the scariest part about all of this, was what a slow decline it was. Like, we need to remember that we're talking about 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. This is a slow decline of losing myself over 4 years. So with that, I ended up continuing to push myself like Sarah does, because I it was unexplainable of what I was going through, right? I'd been to the doctor multiple times. Of course, my blood work is looking okay, just because I'm coming into proper thresholds. But remember, guys, that when it comes to blood work, just because you're in a threshold doesn't mean that your blood work is optimal. So anyways, that's a totally different rant that we'll get into in another podcast. But I ended up going to Texas in September, and I was there for a conference, didn't even take it as a vacation for myself. I was still working through it. And I was really hoping that, again, Texas was going to be this reset that I needed to get myself back. But when I got back from Texas, I ended up declining. And all of a sudden, I started running into these really strange things. I noticed inflammation coming on my body. Over the last couple of years, I had a hard lymph node that's underneath my jawline on the left-hand side. I started to notice that lymph nodes were swelling in my neck to the point where I could literally see them sticking out the side. All of a sudden, I started having really bad scent and chemical sensitivity. I started to develop rashes, hives. All of a sudden, by December, I was struggling with massive food sensitivity and product sensitivity. So, I mean, hair products that I would use all the time, all of a sudden, I'm going into these crazy sneeze fits. Now, it doesn't sound like that's like it's that bad, guys. It was so bad. Like, I mean, like potentially 20 sneezes in a row where you just can't stop. I would get such a bad congestion headache over my eyes. Everything just felt swollen. Like, there was no way to explain how swollen I felt. My body was aching. It was this constant pain. I couldn't even describe the pain because it was so debilitating and just feeling so swollen. Like, I really just felt swollen. I saw a picture of myself from December, and I looked and I was like, oh my gosh, like, I am not fat. I am so swollen right now. And I ended up going to a specialist, and it was for something unrelated, but he started asking me a couple of questions about my health. And so I started dipping into a few of these things. And he's like, you know what? It really sounds like what you're going through is systemic, which means that the multiple things that are happening are potentially coming from one source. And that comment changed everything. After he said that, it was like all of a sudden I got this reassurance in my gut that I was like, I need to deep dive my health. I came home, I pulled out some big sheets of paper, I broke down everything in my health history from the time I was born. I was doing research out the Yahoo, trying to figure out the connecting values of everything that I was experiencing, because I knew that when he told me that what I'm going through is systemic, even though he didn't have the answer as to what, I knew that this was it. So with that, December comes along and things started getting really, really bad. Like, I mean, eating something that I would normally eat all the time, I went into anaphylaxis, I was wheezing, I had a swollen tongue, I couldn't tell what was causing what. And so I decided that it was time to take my health into my own hands, because between how swollen I am, these random food sensitivities, getting these sneeze and massive allergy attacks to things that I use all the time, never knowing what was going to onset it, having the scent and chemical sensitivity, like, it was just turning into an absolute nightmare. And through all of this, I still showed up every single day for work. I never stopped. The reason why is because I knew that if I stopped working, I felt like I lost everything of myself. Because at this point, I've lost my physique, I'm losing my physical health, and now I am starting to lose my mental health because nobody's getting me the answers that I need. It started to become to a point where I didn't realize how much I was isolating myself over the last couple of years. The brain fog was getting so severe and the fatigue was just undescribable. I've always been a tired person. Like right when I was a preteen, I went to the doctor trying to see if there was anything that they could do to try to help me with the fatigue that I was experiencing. But this fatigue I would not wish on my worst enemy. And I decided to go to the naturopath again, but I was requesting my own testing because I had said, look, I've been following your protocol for over 2 years. Things are not getting better, things are getting worse. And what I think I had developed was MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome. Mast cell activation syndrome is when your histamine starts to become too high, it starts spilling over and reacting to things that are not necessarily a threat to your body, but now are starting to become one because of the inflammation on your body. So just remember that you have mast cells all over your body. They're in our gut, but they are also in other areas of our body. So when we're looking at treating mast cell activation syndrome, a lot of people can find relief with an H1 blocker, which would be like a Benadryl, and an H2 receptor blocker, which would be like a Pepcid, because the Pepcid allows for the mast cells in your gut to be taken care of, whereas the H1 receptor blocker can look after the remainder, right? So coupling between the two. But like, let's be honest, nobody wants to be on those long term. There is definitely effects that end up happening with any type of over-the-counter and or pharmaceutical. I need to stress to you guys that pharmaceuticals and over-the-counters break down your gut lining. They can create massive issues. You can also get to a point where all of a sudden you are starting to just get used to it. So that was my biggest fear, was like I was running into so many allergic reactions a day that I was like, what if I start getting used to this Benadryl? Because Claritin never really worked for me. And I knew that I needed to dig deeper into everything. So with the doctor, you can do a blood test to look at your tryptase levels to see if you are dealing with mast cell activation syndrome. But what I want you guys to know from this is that if you are starting to run into mast cell, which we are seeing at such a high influx compared to any decade prior to this, it really comes down to underlying inflammation elsewhere in your body, and we need to understand what's causing that inflammation in order for the MCAS to slow down. So in my case, it was the mold that was causing the MCAS. But with the tryptase levels, in case you are going to go and get them tested, I want to remind you that so first of all, your histamine levels rise the most at night. So a lot of the time, like I would just go lay in bed, or 8 o'clock would come around. And actually, this is something that was happening like a year and a half prior. I got these pillows and I thought that that's what had started it. But every night I was going into these reactions. And even after getting rid of the pillows, I felt like I was never really the same after that. But it was always at night that all of a sudden my allergies were trying to kick up. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out an answer to that. But now I know our histamine levels naturally increase at night. So unless you are actually going into something that's flaring your histamine, chances are your tryptase levels are going to be normal. And just because they're normal doesn't mean that you're not dealing with MCAS. And I wish I would have known that prior to going and getting the testing done, because I would have done something to try to flare it at the time when I was going to get the blood test done. But I didn't do that. I knew that if it fell into the normal range, that I could still have MCAS. But just to give you guys a hint, because I don't ever want anybody to struggle or have to go through the journey that I went through to get the answers that they need. So, with that being said, make sure that you do something beforehand to get that histamine flared so that you can get your tryptase levels more accurately tested. So that came back normal. But I knew without a doubt that with everything that I was experiencing, like all of the symptoms checked off for MCAS. And no matter what we want to call it, whether we want to call it histamine intolerance, whether we want to call it MCAS, whether we just want to call it inflammation, there was something that was triggering this, and this was building up over years. So again, I want you guys to think of like that toxin load bucket that I talked about at the beginning. Our body can only handle so much inflammation, aka sometimes being created by toxins, before it starts to spill over. And when it starts to spill over, if our body is having a hard time detoxing it, we can run into some severe issues. So with that, when I was at the naturopath, I had requested a GI map to see what was going on with my GI. I did an organic acids test to see what was going on at a cellular level. I did food sensitivity testing to just get an idea of what's potentially causing inflammation at this moment that I'm reacting to. And I ended up requesting a mycotoxin test, which is the mold test. And it's so funny because she even asked me, like, are you sure that you want to get the mold test? And I was like, oh, I am sure. Okay. She's like, have you ever been exposed though, or do you think? And I'm like, without a doubt. So one big thing is we used to live in a condo building where, you know, we were on the first floor and the floors were starting to sag. There was these massive cracks that were happening in the wall. All of a sudden, bugs started to come in. Like, we started having ant issues and like spider issues. And I don't mean like a couple, but I mean like Alex woke up the one day with like a wolf spider on his chest, okay? Same thing with the ants. They would start to crawl into bed with you. Like everybody's worst nightmare, okay? And like our place is clean. And so for this to happen to a newer build, I knew that something was wrong. But what ends up happening is that people end up building on marshlands, and all of a sudden these buildings start deteriorating. So the funny part is that we end up learning that Alex ended up having to do some work for the building. He looked in the basement. There was sitting water that was in the basement, and behind the siding, which was constantly getting fucked up, the wood on the structure is so weak that you could literally put your fist through it. Okay, so massive amounts of mold that were in there. You know, I used to work in an old hotel that constantly had water leaks. Okay, like it was breaking through the ceiling. It's an older building, lots of water issues where, you know, water just gets spilled, maybe not cleaned up properly. So that in and of itself. So I was like, just between those two things, I definitely think that I need to get tested. And she's like, okay, yeah, like that's a really good idea. So keep in mind, we don't live in that condo anymore. And we've been in our new place at this time when I was doing the testing for like 5 years already. But if your bucket gets too full or it's having a hard time clearing, it can keep stacking, right? So with that being said, I pushed for the mold test, and I'm so glad that I did because it came back positive. Tons of issues in my GI. There was a lot of issues with my organic acid test, some of it being like protein synthesis issues where it was to the point that she literally asked me like, do you eat very much protein? And I was like, I'm a fucking bodybuilder. Like that is literally like a slap in the face asking if I eat enough protein. And so everything started making sense once I saw, because it was actually the mold test that came back last. And I was like, this is it. This is it. This is what has been causing the MCAS. This is what has been causing the gut issues, the constant infections, the heart racing, the acne and skin issues. Like, yes, I've struggled with acne since I was young, like I said, but to have these really random flares where it was just my entire face, like I shouldn't be having that at 30 years old. So when we look back on the symptom list of some of the things that I had mentioned, the changes in your menstrual cycle, depression and anxiety, the heart racing, right? The inability to have proper protein synthesis, brain fog, confusion. Like the list just goes on and on of all of the things that I was running into. So it's funny because I could have spent my whole life chasing symptom after symptom. But if it wasn't for that one specialist saying that he thought that everything was systemic, I wouldn't be where I am right now, where I am recovering and coming back to life. Now, if you have ever been through anything challenging in your life, I don't care if it's health issues, if it's losing someone, whatever it is, sometimes you end up losing yourself to a point where you feel like you need a comeback, right? But what I really want to remind you guys is that it's not about coming back. It's about learning the lessons that we got taught in those challenges to help redesign the strongest version of ourselves, right? We're never going to be the old us. I'm never going to be 2022, 2021, 2020 Sarah. I am 2025 Sarah, and there is something so powerful about that. I would be lying to you guys if I was just saying that, everything's great, and even though it was a tough lesson, no big deal. It has been a really expensive journey because after figuring out the mold toxicity, I needed to figure out where it was coming from. And a big one was testing the house. Now, these tests are not cheap to have somebody come in and test. So that in and of itself was expensive, but it was worth it for the peace of mind that it gave me. It's not coming from the house. I was able to figure out where it was that I was being exposed. I'm not going to talk to you guys about it on the podcast just because it's just not that story to share. But I do want to tell you that it is at a spot where now I can avoid it. And I am able to take that first step in the recovery. Because if you are dealing with mold toxicity, the first thing that you need to do is get out of the environment. So we tested, the house is clear. Thank the sweet Lord, because working from home, I was like, this isn't just my house that I live in. This is literally my place of work. Like, if it's here, I'm fucked. And so it was a lot of sleepless nights waiting for those results and just praying and praying and praying that it wasn't going to be a massive investment into my house, which, at the end of the day, I would have been shocked, but it's not impossible. We have a wood basement, which is not common for a new build, but that again is another different story. But gratefully, it's not the house. The levels that he found in here, number one, he ended up saying that this is one of the cleanest houses he's ever been into. A big one is that mold likes to grow in dirty environments. It likes to grow in dust. So just getting that compliment was a reassurance in and of itself. But then seeing the levels come back, he's like, this is such a small amount of exposure. He's like, if you went outside for a walk, you'd be getting more mold exposure than what you would be in your house. So I was like, okay, sweet. Thank the sweet Lord. And that's the other part that I want to say with the plants as well, right? Is we love plants in the house because of the oxygen that they provide. But at the same time, too, you really need to be careful because mold can very much grow in the mulch, in the plants, especially if you're overwatering them. So just keep that in mind. But once I got through the testing, I chose to actually reach out to a company in the States to go through the mold protocol on top of doing all of my own studies, because this was Operation Take My Life Back. It's funny because I chose the word redemption for 2025 before I even knew that any of this was going to transpire and take place. So it really is funny how God does these things in your life where He puts you through these challenges that force you to grow in ways that you didn't even realize you needed. This redemption has been so much more than just a word for the year, right? This is taking back my health mentally and physically. It's rebuilding a whole new version of myself. And, like, you know, it isn't until you start feeling better that you realize how lost you really got. It got to a point where I didn't want to talk to anybody, okay? Like, aside from talking to my clients and getting that done, which, like, I'm so blessed to have the team that I do, where I genuinely actually love doing check-ins with my clients and talking with them. I didn't want to talk to anybody else. It was dwindling. I was losing my personality. I had no creativity. It just felt like everything was hard, right? But with that, the company that I'm working with out of the States, the Wellness Way, they've been fabulous. The doctor that I'm working with, it can obviously do it online. And so I've been following her protocol on top of my own protocol. But it had to get worse before it got better. And that's what I want to touch on next, is that when you're on a healing journey, you know, so many people think that once you find out the answer to it, that it's just up and up from there. But sometimes things have to get worse before they got better, right? So number one, I had to figure out where it was coming from. Once I got that confirmed, I needed to avoid that. I was at such a place of exhaustion, and I was at such a place of exhaustion. Okay, I don't know if that paused me there or not, guys, but it looks like we lost internet connection for a second, so I'm not sure there. But the exhaustion was so high that my body just wasn't physically recovering. No matter how hard I tried to go to the gym, my body wouldn't recover. And I could literally feel the oxidative stress build up while I was working out, and then recovery just wouldn't take place. So, with that, I needed to take some downtime. And there was a couple of weeks where walking was too much, which is insane. It's insanity to me. But I needed to do what I needed to do. So, in that time, though, I needed to either focus on other things that were not just working out in the gym. You know, I'm a personal trainer, I'm a bodybuilder. Like, that's so much of my identity of who I am. Then all of a sudden, I get to a point where I am so fucking lost in my head of what has even transpired for me to get to a point where I lost myself so much. And now the only things that I love doing are being taken away from me. So I could either focus on what was being lost, or I could focus on what I was finding, right? Where this was taking me. The knowledge this was allowing for me to build for not just myself, but for my company. Because this has really struck a passion in regards to functional health. My company was always building towards that route anyways, but going through this really brought out a whole new excitement inside of me. But with that being said, I tried to figure out, what else am I going to do, right? So I started building boundaries with work. I started having set hours that I was answering messages. I started taking 2 days off a week, Saturday and Sunday, instead of just one day. I made sure that I was, so with those boundaries, that I was not necessarily pushing myself to constantly work outside of that either. Because that's what happens when you own your own business. Even when you build boundaries of, this is when communication is going to happen, you're still busting your ass doing things outside of that, right? So being able to follow those and give myself permission to rest was a big one. Choosing to do things like coloring, right? Like, I know that that sounds crazy, but I colored a lot of pictures, and it was just something relaxing where it didn't take a lot of strength. It allowed for me to just do something that was really mindless. I got my guitar fixed and started playing guitar again. I just tried to do things that could bring me joy without a lot of physical exertion or a lot of brain power, because I just didn't have it. And so it was tough, but I was able to push through those times and look at the future instead of the past, because I promise you, the only time that we should be looking to the past is for the lesson. But if we choose to stay there in regret, in anger, in resentment, we will stay stuck there. We will miss our future. We won't get to where we want to go as quickly as we want to if we keep staying focused in the past. So instead of being angry that all of this took place, instead of being frustrated that, I lost my physique, that I lost the things that mattered to me the most, I just kept focusing on healing. What can I do to get better? What can I do to get better? So there's been a lot that I have done to get me to where I am today, where I am back on the podcast for you guys. I want to share a couple of those things and, trying to reduce toxin load overall, which means choosing to eat organic. This is something that is recommended to be doing all the time, simply because of what I've been through in my lifetime with toxin load. Supplements, I've been having to take them anywhere from 3 to 5 times a day, and let me tell you, it has been an investment on that side of things. Taking that time off from the gym. A huge one that has been transformative for me is the traditional acupuncture. I have been able to find a traditional acupuncturist to the point where it's like he literally needs a translator for our appointments. And it has brought me a totally different level of calmness and oxygen flow. He was able to get a lot of insight into what was going on with my body. And if anybody's dealing with issues of feeling like their nervous system is dysregulated, feeling like they're struggling with hormonal issues, really the list goes on and on, allergies, muscle pain, like traditional acupuncture is the tits. Okay, I will highly, highly, highly recommend it over and over and over again. I would not be this far in my journey if it wasn't for the acupuncture. I've been doing fulvic soaks from Rogershood, and I will make sure that I put the link in the caption below, because the fulvic soaks are huge, right? It's a natural acid derived from the soil, and it helps pull toxins from your body. It can help pull parasites from your body, and anybody can do this at any time, which is great. Just not if you're pregnant. A lot of the time it just comes down to the fact that no testing has been done on pregnant women. Not that there would actually necessarily be an issue, but just something to keep in mind. I've been doing more mud soaks as well, which is same sort of thing as fulvic soak. It's a European mud that's been around for thousands of years with tons of healing properties to it. So the biggest is just trying to pull that toxin load. I've been doing nasal sprays to help break down the potential biofilms that have built up in my nose from breathing in the mold. And then the other part is now that I have made some serious progress, I actually just had my appointment today with the Wellness Way, and she's slowly approved things for me, right? Like our last appointment last month was being able to get back in the gym, making sure that I'm still progressing in the right direction and that I'm still having good recovery without seeing setbacks. And so we checked that off the list. Now I am going to be going into the sauna, so I'm super excited to start sweating things out. She just wants to see my progress for 1 more month. It has been 2 months into full protocol, and once we're done month 3, then she wants to take me through the full detox steps. So really what's been going on is simply getting out of the environment, bringing the inflammation down on my body, staying away from my extensive list of food sensitivities that I didn't even break down for you guys, but it was insane when the food sensitivity list came back, because I knew with how high my inflammation was, I needed to just stay away from these things indefinitely, which is dairy, eggs, gluten, potatoes, yeast, brewers and bakers, which I always knew that I was yeast sensitive, squash, barley, amaranth. So a lot of different grains, but also a lot of protein sources like dairy and eggs. So that was a big one for me, but that's okay because I have proven that if you set your mind to something, you can make it easy if you choose to believe that it's going to be easy. There's always going to be a hard in life, and I'd be lying if I said that sometimes you just simply get frustrated of feeling like, oh man, I am restricted in some ways, of feeling like I'm on such a tight regimen with supplements, feeling like the food protocol is so strict. But I can either keep telling myself that it's strict and restricted, or I can say that this is easy and have fun with the challenge of incorporating different new food groups that do agree with my body. So it's been really fun. I've shared a lot of my meals on Instagram, and if I do say so, I can call myself Chef Sari these days. So it's been going really well in that regard. But the best thing has truly been seeing the inflammation come off of my body, and just being able to get that permission and that praise from my practitioner that I am making the progress. And sometimes when we are, really sick, or we're struggling with something really bad and things start getting better, sometimes you forget how bad it really was, because unless you're in the midst of that challenge, that ache, that symptom, you don't know how good it feels to just feel good, because you're not running into any issues, right? So that is one thing that I've had to do, is slow myself down and really take time to appreciate, like, even though there's still a long ways that I need to go in my journey, I am so grateful for everything that has changed to put me in such a better spot, right? That I am so far from where I was prior, that I need to give myself praise for how quickly my body truly is healing, how resilient our bodies and our minds are, and just how much of my life I'm getting back, and the ability to take these lessons and rebuild myself into the person I need to be right now. And with that, it has been a long episode going over all this. So I really hope that it all made sense, that you got a ton of value from it. Once I don't know if I finished saying this either, but once I get through these 3 months, then I'll be going into the detox phase. It was really about taking the inflammation off of my body for these first 3 months, and then we're going into some detox. But the improvements that I've been able to see, the change in myself overall, like this last period, it was a perfect period, 28 days, no breast pain, no cramping, no nothing. Like, I was like, this is the best. I cannot wait to see this all come together full circle. If you are watching this on YouTube, the change in my acne has been tremendous. There's still a little bit of ways to go, but girl, from where I used to be to now, I am a completely different woman in that sense. So instead of focusing on, hey, I still have a little bit of acne, it's like, look at how great my skin is. I am so proud of the growth that I have been able to have. So I know that this episode was a lot of information. So if you have any questions, if you feel like you're running into similar issues like what I explained in my journey, reach out to me on Instagram at the Naked and Truth Podcast, at authentically.fit. Either account works good, and let's talk about it, right? Because I know how isolating it feels, how frustrating it feels if you're not being taken seriously by the medical professionals that you're going and talking to. And I know that sometimes you just want to be heard and understood. If you are currently getting exposed to mold, just remember, everybody does react to mold differently, but chronic exposure is not good for anybody. It's something that we want to make sure that we are mindful of. But when we're looking at the stats, like, I know just recently I read a stat that just in the US alone, over 50% of homes and businesses have water damage. So with all of the health issues that we're running into, a lot of people feeling misunderstood, and like they're just compiling issue after issue instead of getting to the root of it. Sometimes a lot of what we're going through is more systemic than we realize, and I hope that this inspires you to keep being an advocate for your health. I am just truly so excited to be back. There are some really good things coming without me pushing everything at once and expecting myself to do everything, because you guys know I was that do everything girl. I was on every platform. I'm going one at a time. I care about consistency, I care about quality. So we're going to keep up with the podcast. It just feels good to have some creativity flowing, but also just feeling like I'm at that spot where I'm excited to communicate with you guys. So I hope that you could feel it on this episode. I just want to thank you guys for sticking around. I want you to know that I love y'all so much, and I will check you on the next episode.